Hello, everybody. Get some water real quick before we get started. Have my giant water canteen. All right. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're all having a good one. Welcome to the Raven's Roost, and this is a Raven Read stream. Used to do these every Monday. Kind of had to take a break because my voice was not doing great, and tonight my voice is also not doing so great, but that's mostly my throat. Last night I ate something that was way too hot, and it burned my throat, and now my throat's kind of sore, raw from that. It'll go away in a day or two, but right now it's kind of annoying. So tonight, for those of you who don't know how this works, on my reading streams, we read my stories. We read books that I have written or stories that I have written, because I am a writer. I'm a novelist. In fact, I love writing stories more than I do playing video games or studying history. Telling stories and telling character adventures and stuff is a passion of mine. It's something I've loved since I was in elementary school. And I am very excited to get to share some of my stories with you guys, especially ones that will never be published. Tonight is going to be a fun one. Before we get into it, let me restate the rules for those of you who are new. So the rules are simple. We do not talk gaming in these streams. I know that it's tempting. I know that a lot of you are fans of my gaming stuff, and I get it. But this is one stream where we don't talk gaming. We only talk about stories and writing. If you come in and you ask, like, hey, Raven, what do you think about this game? Or are you excited for For Honor's update? Or are you excited for Space Marine 2 or anything like that? I'm not going to answer you. And if you bug me about it, I'm just going to put you in timeout. It's that simple. It's not that I don't want to talk about it. It's that we're reading tonight. We're doing stories. That's the deal. The second rule is please be respectful of the reading. Don't try to distract me or write in all caps or repeat messages to me. If I'm reading, I'm not looking at chat. Okay? I'll glance at chat every now and then, but I can't respond to it mid-read. Okay? Please just be patient. When I get to the end of a chapter, I may stop and answer a few questions that I saw. But other than that, I'm in reading mode. So please keep that in mind. Third rule, please be respectful to each other. If someone has a question or wants to know something or doesn't quite follow, don't chastise them, just be respectful to them. Okay? That's what I ask. Now, what are we reading tonight? Tonight is going to be a story that I have not read on the channel before. I do not know if I've made a story sharing video about this. I'll double check, but I don't think I have. It is called The Night Angel. This is one of the earliest stories I ever wrote. I think it was maybe my third or fourth story that I ever wrote, period. I wrote it back when I was a freshman in college, so it was a couple of years ago. And it is also the very first story I ever wrote that involved a female protagonist. Up until this point, all of my stories have been about a male protagonist. So this was a very fun story for me to write. It was a little different. And since I always get asked, I'll go ahead and answer the question. Everyone asks, where do I get inspiration for my stories? This story had various inspirations. Now, people think, they look at Rebecca, the main character here, and they think it was Katniss Everdeen. It was not. I actually have never read The Hunger Games, and I have no interest in it. No, Katniss was not the inspiration. There were several inspirations. One was the show Supernatural. That was an inspiration. Another one was Tomb Raider, Lara Croft. That was an inspiration. There was also the inspiration of Scooby-Doo. That was an inspiration for a little while. There were various inspirations. And I worked very hard to try to incorporate different elements and ideas into the story. To put it simply, what the story is about is Rebecca Anderson is a young woman who has a special gift. She is gifted in hunting monsters. Most people don't know about monsters or know about their existence, but she does, and she wants to hunt them. But along her journey and her adventures of hunting monsters and uncovering the secrets of the night, she discovers there's a secret about herself that she was not prepared to hear, and it will change her life forever. But it may be important because as she goes forward, she learns that there's an evil that is surfacing that only she can combat. So that is essentially what we have going for this story. So, Raven, what's your inspiration for the bee story? It was just an idea that came to my head. Don't have a lot of inspiration for that one. All right. Anyway, so let's not waste any time anymore. we've got this ready to go. We're going to start with the Night Angel tonight, so let's get right into it. And I will remind you one more time, this is one of my first stories, one of my earlier stories when I was still a young writer and still not very good at writing. So you will see errors. You will think that it's a little choppy. You will see that there were some problems. I haven't edited this story in a very long time, so be aware. You'll see it, okay? Yes, Hannah, you're always so patient. Thank you. All right, here we go. The Night Angel. Night Angel Chapter 1, written September 6, 2012. That should give you an idea of how old it is. It's 12 years old. All right. Night Angel Chapter 1. The night was bathed in a glorious glow from the full moon. It was alive with death. The tree's shadows cast eerie marks on the ground, but this was all the same to the shadow that was slipping from tree to tree in the middle of the wildlife park. The figure slipped quiet as a fox down behind a bush and stayed perfectly still. She peeked over the edge of the limbs and saw what she had been looking for. 3 targets. She could see all 3 lumbering across the forest. They hadn't spotted her yet, and when she was done, they wouldn't ever know she had been there. She reached behind her and pulled out a large black compound bow. It was heavy with a powerful kick to it, but it was her weapon of choice for the situation. From her quiver, she pulled an arrow. The arrow itself didn't look special, but she knew different. This arrow was tipped with blessed silver. Nothing that she hit with this arrow would ever get back up. Placing the arrow carefully on the string, she pulled back. She felt the tension of the bow fight her as she pulled further and further back until the string finally set. "Forgive me," she whispered to the targets, though they couldn't hear her. In fact, if they could have heard her, it wouldn't have meant anything to them anyway, because words mean nothing to the undead. "I have no choice. I'll end your suffering. Your deaths will be swift." She released the string. The arrow flew with unparalleled grace and accuracy. There was a grunt and a moan as it went clear through the skull of the first zombie. It fell to its knees, and then fell to its face and lay motionless. The other 2 paid no attention to their fallen comrade. They probably didn't even realize he had been killed. However, the sound of her bow firing off the first arrow had alerted one of them. It made a low growl and began lumbering over in the direction of the noise. The young archer was already drawing back her bow for another shot. She fired. The beast fell, an arrow striking through its eye socket and out the back of its head. The archer stepped out from her hiding place behind the bushes and made her way silently to the zombie. She reached and grabbed the arrow, carefully removing the deadly weapon from the zombie's head. She was careful not to make too much noise so that the third zombie wouldn't notice her. Zombies can't see. They hear, smell, and feel. That's it, she reminded herself. She wiped the arrow on a wet cloth and then stung it from the bow once more. There was a pistol holster to her waist that would have made things much easier, but she didn't believe in wasting ammo. She pulled back on the bowstring until it set and pointed it at the zombie's head. Once she was sure she had a shot, she whistled, causing the corpse to turn to face her. "Rest in peace," she whispered. She fired. The zombie didn't even have time to roar or moan as the arrow traveled through the bridge of his nose and out the back of his head. The rotting corpse fell to the ground with a sickening thump and lay motionless. The archer stepped forward and removed the arrow from the dead corpse, and also from the first zombie she had shot. She went about her business of wiping her arrows on the cloth so that they were fresh and clean for later. It was a ritual she always went through after using them. As she worked, she glanced up at the moon above her, full and luminescent. It was a gorgeous sight, the reason that she loved the night so much. There was nothing quite as comforting or mysterious as a full moon. It basked her in its heavenly glow and made her feel that much closer to heaven. She smiled up at it. It was a questioning smile, as if she were asking the moon to reveal its darkest secrets, to share with her the truth of its light and its mystery. What a conversation she could have if she could have won with the night. "Dad is going to kill me when I get home," she whispered out loud. She thought about her dad, and her hand went to her neck. She began to finger a small necklace around it. It was a tiny golden chain, and hanging from it was a small golden cross. It had been a birthday present from her father and mother. As memories of her mother filled her mind, she grimaced and shook her head, trying to let go of those thoughts. "I hope Dad doesn't get too upset. He gets worried so easily," she whispered. "I had promised not to stay out so late this time, too." As usual, she had been caught up in the thrill of the hunt. Besides, it really didn't matter to her what her dad said. Tonight had been so eventful that she really didn't care. After all, she had to have at least one fun evening before school started up tomorrow. She shivered at the thought. Why can't I just stop going to school? I know all that I need to already, she whispered. As she spoke, she heard a rustling and turned to see the 3 corpses were starting to decay. They were disintegrating and turning to dust before her eyes. Their bodies, now powder, drifted away on a calm and steady breeze. This was a common sight for her. A zombie is nothing but a decaying corpse. Once it's killed, the corpse completes the decaying process instantaneously, she remembered. From the dust we were made, and the dust we return. Amen, she said calmly. She strapped the bow to her back and stashed the arrow she had just cleaned back into her quiver. She walked out of the forest and past the trees to get out of the park and into the open parking lot outside. The lot was completely empty with the exception of one lone motorcycle, a silver motorcycle, a guilty pleasure to say the least. She grinned from ear to ear as she climbed on. She was careful to adjust her leather jacket and jeans before sitting down so that they wouldn't rub her while she rode. She started the bike, feeling it come to life under her brought her life as well. She kicked off and rode, her gorgeous brown hair flapping behind her wildly. The night was inviting her, and she wanted desperately to answer that call. Perhaps to any other girl or boy her age, the sight of zombies in the open would be a terrifying sight, but to Rebecca Anderson, this was just another one of her simple pleasures. She hated school, but instead preferred to go to church. She didn't have time for malls unless she was killing zombies in them. Her opinion of a good time was riding through the night under a full moon, hunting down the hunters of the night. What more could a 20-year-old girl want? Chapter 2. Time to wake up, Rebecca. Rebecca rubbed her eyes sleepily. She hadn't gotten back home until 3 in the morning, and she was exhausted. Her body was stiff, and she wanted nothing more than just pass out and forget about everything. Rebecca had a slight envy for vampires. They didn't have to wake up every morning, but instead got to enjoy the pleasures of the night and sleep during the day. Some creatures get all the luck. Dad, do I have to? Well, as I understand it, you have classes today, so yes. Rebecca suddenly grabbed her pillow and shoved it over her face. She'd totally forgotten about class. The summer was finally over and school was back in it. She was just starting college, and all the years of high school had been a living hell. Why would college be any better? How could anyone survive school? How had she done it? There's no fun, no monsters, no weapons. It's all just classes and tests and annoying people. Which wouldn't be so bad if those classes taught Rebecca anything she actually wanted to know. Dad, I've been over it before. I didn't want to do this. We'll have none of that, Rebecca. Get dressed and come downstairs. She heard her dad's footsteps disappear, and she decided it was time to get up. Removing the pillow from her face, she climbed out of bed and glanced around her room. It was your typical teenager room. There was a chest of drawers and a dresser against the wall. Her bed was a twin-size bed with blue sheets, and right next to it was her desk. A bathroom was situated next to her room, and at the far corner was a closet with different assortments of clothes. She walked into her closet and began hunting for some. She eventually settled with a red t-shirt and jean shorts without putting on her shoes. Rebecca darted down the stairs to the kitchen where breakfast and her father were waiting for her. Jonah Anderson was a pastor at the local Baptist church. He was a strong and hard-working man, about 6'4", with dark, graying hair. His eyes were a deep blue, and he always had a warm look of kindness about him, even when he was angry. Most of the people in town loved Rebecca's father, and with good reason. There wasn't a single lost soul that he wouldn't reach out to. Rebecca loved her dad, and she hated to see his heart broken, but he never really understood her love for monster hunting. He smiled as Rebecca walked into the room. He looked her over and grinned from ear to ear. She grinned back. Good morning, Dad, Rebecca said, giving her father a hug. Do you think I was born yesterday, sweetheart? He asked in reply. I know that you were out all last night. Rebecca's smile suddenly faded. Did you honestly think I wouldn't figure it out? He asked. Rebecca hung her head low and let go of her dad. Dad, I'm real sorry. No, you're not. You loved every minute of it. Rebecca gave a shadow of a smirk. But you should have known better. It was a school night. And it was my birthday night, Dad. I think I'm allowed a little bit of a reprieve. And besides, you know I hate school anyway. Rebecca turned and sat down at the table staring at the eggs and bacon in front of her. But don't you want to make friends, learn something new, actually do something, make a career in your life? Friends? Rebecca laughed. You mean those giggling, gossipy gewgaws who do nothing but talk about boys all day and judge others based on their looks? I think I make better friends with zombies. She grabbed her fork and started shoveling the eggs into her mouth. Slow down, her dad cried, and you'll never make friends with that attitude. Rebecca shrugged and went back to her breakfast. which she finished in a matter of minutes. She'd always tried to eat fast. As soon as she was finished, she leapt from the table and prepared to run to her room. "Hold up!" Rebecca stopped in her tracks. Her father was holding out his hand for her to come sit back down. She obeyed and took a seat across from him, looking him in the eyes. There was a seriousness in his gaze that she couldn't possibly ignore. "We need to talk about something very important, Rebecca." Rebecca leaned forward and nodded. "Look, sweetheart, I made a promise to your mom." When he mentioned Rebecca's mom, Rebecca stiffened, trying to maintain her straight face. "And now that you're 20, I think it's time that I explained it a bit better. I'd promised her that I would do my best to give you the best future that you could have. And I know that you've always hated school. You've kicked and you've screamed through the whole thing. But I have to push you through it so that I can keep that promise. Rebecca, if not for me, just do it for your mother." Rebecca nodded, but her face didn't brighten. "I'll go." Jonah stood up and rushed around the table to hug her. "I know you will. I promise that I'll make it up to you later." "And how's that?" Rebecca asked gruffly. Jonah gave her a very nervous look. "I have a few ideas, but we can talk more about that later. Now, go. Get ready for your classes." Rebecca left her dad's embrace and turned for the stairs. Her dad's words still weighed heavily on her mind. The promise he had made to her mom. It wounded her. She walked through the kitchen into the den and then up the stairs. Sitting up her room door was her backpack, empty and waiting to be filled with the books and binders and everything else that she had neglected to organize. She went to work filling it, but there was a pit in her stomach. While her bag grew heavier with books, her heart was growing heavy with the memories of her mom. Susan Anderson was a beautiful woman and had meant the world to Rebecca. If anyone thought Rebecca was odd, then they could blame it on Susan, because Rebecca certainly took after her mother. Her loss had been a crippling blow to Rebecca, but more than her loss, it had been the manner at which she had been lost. Though the authorities never would admit it or accept it, Rebecca and her father knew the truth. Susan Anderson had been killed by a werewolf. It was a memory that would forever haunt Rebecca. The day that the beast had attacked their home. It was the first time that she'd ever believed monsters could exist. The memories of that low howl, the deafening roar, and then the scream. The scream of her mother was what frightened Rebecca more than anything else. Rebecca had only been 9 years old when the werewolf had killed her mother, and ever since, Rebecca has decided herself to hunting down the monsters and supernatural beasts that roam the earth. Was it for revenge? No. Revenge would be way too simple an explanation for her actions. When Rebecca learned that it had been a werewolf, her eyes had been opened to the dark world of monsters and demons that stalked the earth. She hunted monsters for the reason that it was in memory of her mother more than it was for revenge. She knew that hunting the werewolf that had killed her mother would be a waste of time and would probably never be successful. So when asking the question of why, the answer, be defined by a black and white perspective of revenge, retribution, and all monsters, was an oversight. The real answer was so complicated that Rebecca herself didn't fully know her reasons. Perhaps one day it would be clearer to her, but all she knew now was that monster hunting was what she loved to do, what she had to do. If not for herself, then for her mom. "I'll make you proud of me," Rebecca whispered to her mom, though she would never hear it. And drink some water, then we'll read chapter 3. Chapter 3. "God, I hate school," Rebecca shouted. No one could hear her, of course. The night was all that listened, and its noises were all that answered her. The tree bark was rough against her back. Her leather jacket felt warm against the cold night air, and her body felt relaxed after a long day of feeling lonely and bored. Rebecca was running her fingers along her knife, feeling the cold steel under her fingertips. More than once she wished that she'd been carrying this while back in school. She could have used it when she got locked out of her locker, and when that boy had touched her butt. Strapped to her back was the black compound bow and a quiver of 10 arrows. She welcomed their weight on her back right now and was happy to have that security. The backpack that she carried around in school felt too bulky, and it almost made her feel exposed that it wasn't loaded with weapons. I'm just not learning anything there. This is my classroom, she whispered to herself. The night was her home and her teacher. She knew the smells and the sounds by heart. She could tell the difference between the howl of a local coyote and the howl of a werewolf. She could recognize the smell of a zombie's rotting flesh from a mile away. The taste of bloodlust in the air when a hungry vampire was on the prowl. This was her school and her teacher. It was where she felt comfortable. And after such a long and disappointing day in classes, she had jumped on her bike and rode out to the forest, where there was always something to keep her busy. There was nothing quite like the thrill of the hunt. It was a strange feeling, to hunt that which hunts, to be the apex predator. Rebecca sheathed her knife and leaned her head against the tree, closing her eyes and breathing in deeply. She felt peace at last. Until her phone rang. Rebecca's hand flew to her jean pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She checked the caller ID and saw a picture of her dad on it. She smiled and put the phone to her ear. "Hi, Dad," she said warmly. "Rebecca, how was school?" Rebecca smiled, changed to a frown. "That bad, huh?" "I'd rather not talk about it," Rebecca started darkly. Though it hadn't been the worst day of her life, Rebecca hadn't enjoyed it. "Where are you right now?" her father asked. Rebecca shrugged. "Somewhere in the woods. I'm hunting." She heard a sigh through the phone and grinned. "All right, well, how long are you planning on being out?" "A few more hours, maybe. Don't worry, I'll try to be back before you go to bed." "Please do. You know how much I worry." Rebecca nodded. "Also, be careful. Those woods are filled with the most ungodly of creatures." "Dad, I know," Rebecca laughed. "I'm not a kid anymore. Rebecca paused. There was the faintest noise, and it didn't belong here. The sounds of the night were not a mystery to Rebecca, but this sound didn't belong. It was low and it was threatening, but it didn't belong to any of the normal creatures that she recognized. In fact, it didn't sound like anything she had ever heard in these woods. "Rebecca, what is it?" "Dad, I gotta go. Something just came up." Rebecca hung up the phone and stashed it in her pocket. Every part of her body felt revived. She felt a grin spread across her face as she prepared to hunt. Adrenaline surged, filled her cold body with warmth. This was what she loved to do. Rebecca jumped away from the tree and took off into the night. The light of the moon was her way of finding her path. The trees towered over her, covering her and giving her the shadow she needed to hide within. Her body moved like the wind, without sound and without detection. The leaves beneath her feet crunched quietly beneath her boots, but aside from this, the only noise that could be heard was her own breathing and the breeze that blew by. She was the night. She was one with it. This was what made her the perfect monster hunter. The sound was getting clearer to her now as she slowed down. "What is that?" Rebecca asked herself. The sound got closer and closer. Rebecca slowed down her pace, though she couldn't attract attention. It was strange and yet a familiar sound. What was it? What was making it? The sound suddenly vanished to be replaced with another. The sound began to become a little bit more recognizable. She was hearing speech. Someone was speaking. Rebecca came to a halt as she listened to hear what was being said. She dropped down and hid behind a briar patch. "Ryan, you can't go doing stuff like this, man." The voice was male. It sounded young. A little older than Rebecca, though. There was sort of a slang to it. It sounded like the owner of the voice might be black. "Who says? You?" This one was also a male's voice, but it sounded even younger than the first one. "Last time I checked, you don't tell me what to do. No one does. Better hope you don't let S here know that." The black voice spoke up. There was a pause. "You let me worry about S." "Yeah, whatever, man." Rebecca dared to peek above the briar patch to take a look. There were 3 people. They were all male and rather tall. One was black, the other 2 were white. They were all facing each other and talking. The tallest one was grinning at the other 2. He seemed to be Ryan. "You be pretty damn quiet, Mike. What's with you?" Ryan asked. The third guy was standing silent to the side, staring around the area. "Guess I'm just not comfortable with this," the black figure had nodded. "Yeah, I'm with Mike on this one," he said quickly. "S is going to be so pissed when..." "You know what? Shut, the both of you," Ryan snapped. "S won't find out if you don't squeal. Bro, S always finds out things he always finds these things out. You think we can hide from him? The last guy who tried to hide from him was..." Rebecca was listening intently to every word. She didn't know who they were or what they were talking about, but she knew one thing. These weren't normal boys. There was something different about them, something otherworldly. Rebecca reached for her knife and pulled out the blade. She turned her back on the boys and held up the knife so that she could see through the reflection of the blade. And what she saw confirmed her fears. The 3 boys had no reflection in the blade. "Vampires," Rebecca hissed. Rebecca slipped her knife back into her sheath and reached for her bow. This wouldn't be like hunting zombies. Vampires were smarter, faster, cunning, and much more dangerous. She needed a plan, and she needed one fast. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to string her first arrow. "Look, we're all in this together, right?" Ryan continued. "And if I said no, then I'll kill you before you go back crying to S." "I'm in." "Nice choice, Mike. Big B." "Look, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm more scared of S than I am of you." There was a long pause. Rebecca could hear the sound of rustling in the grass. The vampires seemed to have stopped. Maybe they noticed something. "Well then, it's your lucky day, Big B," Ryan snarled, "because I won't have to kill you and neither will S." There was another pause. "Because you're going to be killed by a monster hunter." Rebecca's heart stopped in her chest. She felt sick to her stomach. How had they found her? She'd been perfectly quiet. There was no way, and yet... "Isn't that right, you murderous bitch?" Ryan shouted. This time, planning and strategizing was long since past. Her hand moved over to a special pistol holstered to her side. The question was if she could pull it out and fire before the vampires moved. Vampires weren't faster than bullets, but their reflexes were 6 times that of a normal human. She'd have to take them by surprise. Fat chance of that happening, though. "You gonna come out to play, or do we have to go in and get you?" Ryan snapped. The other two moved next to him. Rebecca had her back to them, so she couldn't see the anger in their eyes or the bloodlust. And maybe that was for the best. "All right. Have it your way. Mike, bring her here." There was a growl and then movement. Rebecca tightened her hand on the gun, ready to fire. Rebecca spun around just as the bushes beside her burst apart. Rebecca raised the gun. "Gotcha!" Chapter 4. Rebecca clenched up her body, ready to feel the cold hands of the monster clutch her. She shut her eyes tightly and... There was a scream. Rebecca's eyes burst open. She hadn't screamed, but that was definitely a scream. Rebecca spun to look and saw that the vampires weren't looking at her. In fact, they were looking the other way. The one they called Mike was dragging a girl by the wrist. She was screaming. Her black hair was a mess, and her shirt was torn at certain places. Rebecca couldn't make out all the features with this lack of light, but she knew that this girl was close to her age. Who was she? "Did you really think we wouldn't find you, monster hunter?" Ryan snarled. Rebecca breathed out with a sigh of relief. She hadn't been found out. They thought that this stranger was her. "We knew that there was a monster hunter somewhere around here, and we knew it was some chick." "Please, let me go," the girl cried between sobs. "I've done nothing wrong." "Exactly. Which is why we can't afford to let you live." Rebecca felt herself tense up again as Ryan spoke. How had they known that there was a female monster hunter in this area? For that matter, what was it that they were planning that required such drastic stakes? Vampires aren't stupid and mindless killers. They're calculating and intelligent. And they know that you can't solve all your problems by killing. In fact, most vampires rarely kill at all because they know that it would draw attention to them. Maybe these were fledgling vampires, only freshly created. "I swear, I won't tell anyone anything." "You're right. You won't." Rebecca watched as Ryan took a dangerous step towards a mysterious stranger. Rebecca felt her blood run cold. "Hold her down, boys. I'm going to enjoy this." When engaging vampires, it is a foolish thing to engage directly, because a vampire will always have the advantage in a direct fight. What is even more foolish, however, is to engage a group of vampires in the hope of being victorious. This was a rule of thumb. Rebecca knew this rule well, and she'd always abided by it. However, now she knew that she would have to break this rule. She was about to be a fool. There was no way that she would abandon this girl to these monsters. Rebecca grabbed her bow and removed one silver-tipped arrow. She needed to think, and think fast. Okay, I have the element of surprise, Rebecca thought. If I can strike hard and fast, then maybe I can throw them off guard. Even as she thought about the genius of this plan, she knew that it was doomed for failure. The strategy was littered with holes and problems that she knew would get her killed. But what other choice did she have? Rebecca answered that question by notching the arrow to her bowstring. She stood up straight, standing over the briar patch. The vampires were too busy staring at the girl to notice her. That girl was no monster hunter, and these three were going to find out the hard way. Rebecca pulled back on the string, and in that instant, Rebecca became an angel of death. Her aim was true and her hand was steady. She didn't think, and she knew she would make this shot. Rebecca released the string. Zombies and vampires are both considered undead creatures, but they are very different, even in the way that they die. For example, a zombie can only die if their head is destroyed. A vampire, on the other hand, could easily survive a common head wound. For this reason, Rebecca always laces her weapons with silver or blessed steel. Sometimes she'll even dip her knives in garlic. This way, she can always be sure to kill her prey. So when Rebecca's arrow pierced the vampire Big B's heart, Not only did he feel it enter, he felt unbelievable agony. "Ah!" he screeched. The arrowhead was made of silver, and Rebecca had consecrated it before firing. A double dose of death to a vampire. The area around the entry wound began to burn and turn black. His comrades watched in horror as Bigby's entire body began to burn away and ignite like ash in the flame. Soon there was nothing left but the echo of the vampire's scream and the smell of burned flesh. Rebecca didn't have time to draw another arrow. By the time she'd drawn it, the other two vampires would have already responded and moved on the attack. Rebecca tossed her bow to the ground and quickly grabbed her knife, jerking it from its sheath. "What the hell?" Ryan roared. "Another monster hunter!" "Nope, just one," Rebecca cried. Rebecca burst from her hiding place and charged the two. Ryan was the first to respond, leaping away from Rebecca and dodging to the side. Mike, who had been holding down the struggling girl, couldn't evade Rebecca in time. Rebecca proceeded to ram the end of her blade deep into the shoulder of Mike's body, and then came the agony. "Ah!" Mike cried, throwing Rebecca away from him with one hand. Rebecca flew backwards and landed away from him. Mike was now clutching his shoulder in pain. The area around the wound was burning away and smoking, but it wouldn't kill him. She hadn't punctured his heart. Mike snarled dangerously, trying to climb to his feet. Rebecca had just lost the element of surprise. She could only play defensive games now. "So, you're the monster hunters we were warned about," Ryan snapped. In the light and the lack of shadows, Rebecca could see that Ryan was about her age, with dark brown hair and red eyes. He was very pale, and his lips were red. His fangs were bared, and he had on typical school-style clothing. "I'm gonna kill her!" Mike screamed. "Nah, leave her to me," Ryan snapped back, baring his fangs. "You take care of that girl." Mike gave a pained snarl back to Ryan. "She stabbed me!" he cried. "And I'll do worse to if you don't do as I say. We can't leave any witnesses, and that girl has seen too much. Take care of her!" Rebecca acted fast and ran to Mike. Mike saw this and leapt away from her knife, scared of another strike. Rebecca fell back just as he leaped. "Run!" Rebecca screamed. The girl didn't need telling twice. She leapt up and took off like a shot into the dark forest. Ryan was fuming. "I said hunt that bitch down like the dog she is!" he snapped. Mike started to give chase, but Rebecca had moved yet again. Mike let out a roar as her knife buried itself into his chest. This time, Mike's heart had been struck. There was a familiar smell of burning flesh, the agonizing scream, and then nothing. "You and me now, hotshot," Rebecca shouted. Ryan was staring back at her. Rebecca couldn't tell if he looked amused or furious. "Impressive," he sneered. "But nothing's changed." Rebecca's heart was racing. Even one-on-one, taking a vampire is a very dangerous situation. Her only hope was for him to let down his guard long enough. If she could come up with an attack plan, maybe she could come out of this in one piece. Options and ideas began floating through her mind, each one more stupid than the last. Her best bet was to stall. Stall for time. That was all she could think to do. "I beg to differ. You're out two goons," Rebecca countered. Ryan gave a laugh. "You think they mattered? They were pawns." He began to pace, as if he was deep in thought, but his eyes never moved from Rebecca. "I don't think you realize just how big a mistake you made." Rebecca shook her head. "I overheard your little conversation. You were planning something, and I'm stopping it here and now before innocent people get hurt." Suddenly Ryan's face went rigid. "You don't know anything about my plan." "I know enough. You're violent and bloodthirsty, even by vampire standards. You're planning some kind of attack on humans." Ryan gave her a dangerous look, but it wasn't threatening. Was it fear? Anger? No. "You're wrong. I'm not trying to attack the humans," Ryan interjected. "I'm trying to save them." Whatever Rebecca had expected to hear, it wasn't that. Rebecca didn't let down her guard, though. Vampires are shrewd, and this could be a ruse to try and make her hesitate. But the look on Ryan's face looked sincere. He didn't seem to be lying. But what was he planning? He took a step forward, making Rebecca tighten her grip on the knife. "I'm trying to stop the attack on the humans," Ryan hissed. "What attack?" Ryan took another step forward. "What are you talking about, bloodsucker?" Ryan sighed and began to curse under his breath. "This was supposed to be a group effort, but you killed the rest of them. Fine, look," Ryan growled. "There isn't much time. You have to..." The sound of a gunshot echoed through the entire forest. Rebecca went down on one knee and went to her pistol holstered by her side. It was a last resort weapon, because each bullet was specially made and she couldn't afford to waste the ammo. She drew the gun and pointed up towards the sound of the blast. However, the only thing she saw was Ryan hit the ground. "Hold on!" Rebecca roared. She leapt to her feet and ran to the downed vampire. She knelt down by his head and saw a large wound in his chest. And it was burning. The blow had been won from a blessed object, probably a silver bullet. "Night Angel," he whispered painfully. Rebecca gave him a puzzled look. "That is Your name among our kind, he breathed. Rebecca leaned closer. He reached up and grabbed her jacket, pulling her to his face. S, he whispered. His face was starting to burn. It was fading away and turning to dust. Stop, S. Who's S? And how do I stop him? Rebecca cried. Ryan's head fell back and began to dissolve into dust. Soon she was holding nothing but a pile of ash. She had no answers, but only more questions. What had she just seen? Were the 3 vampires really trying to save humans? Why was she called the Night Angel? Who had killed Ryan to make sure he didn't talk? Was it S? Who was S? And what kind of threat did this S pose? Was it all a hoax? None of these questions had answers. The only thing that Rebecca knew was this. Things are about to get really, really bad. Chapter 5. I don't understand it, Rebecca muttered to herself. What was he talking about? Rebecca had left the clearing where she'd encountered the vampires. There was nothing left there. She had tried searching for the bullet that had killed Ryan, but no such luck. Whoever had killed him clearly didn't want him telling Rebecca something, which made Rebecca believe that Ryan was telling the truth. There was a threat, and it all seemed to center around this S character. But who is S? Rebecca whispered. As Rebecca walked, she felt the night embrace her with a chilled wind. It comforted her and made her feel refreshed. Her fatigue was gone and her mind was clearing. She always found it easier to think when the night was young. And then that reminded her, what's a night angel? Rebecca asked out loud. The vampire Ryan had called her the Night Angel. But what did that mean? However, that wasn't the biggest question on her mind. The real question was, and what do I do now? Her phone rang suddenly. Good timing, Dad, Rebecca muttered. She went to her phone and yanked it out. She placed it to her ear and tried to sound normal. Rebecca, sweetheart, are you okay? You disappeared suddenly and I haven't heard from you. What's wrong? Dad, I'm fine, Rebecca said calmly. Just ran into a little trouble. Well, what happened? Rebecca considered lying and keeping the truth to herself. But if she ever felt like she needed her dad for something, it was now. Dad, I ran into a trio of vampires. You what? Are you all right? Rebecca groaned. I'm fine, Dad. They're dead. Rebecca inhaled deeply and continued. But one of them told me some disturbing information. He said that there was going to be an all-out attack on us humans. He told me this right before he was executed by someone or something. Rebecca, are you sure that he wasn't just trying to, deceive you? I wouldn't be very quick to trust the word of a vampire. He had no reason to lie, Dad. He told me all this while he was breathing his last breath. There was a long pause on the other end. He called me something, too. He did. What did he call you? He called me Night Angel. Do you know what that means? There was a long pause. This time, though, there was an uncomfortable feeling. It was like she could feel the tension building in her dad. Dad, you there? Dad, do you know what that means? You need to come home right now, Rebecca. Rebecca felt fear build within her. It couldn't be possible. Jonah Anderson, her father, sounded scared. Nothing ever scared her dad. Nothing. But there was no mistaking the tremble of fear in his voice. Dad, what's going on? Do you believe what that vampire said? I don't want to believe it, Rebecca, he said, but based upon the evidence I've been gathering in certain events, I don't have a choice but to believe that what he said is the truth. Dad, what was he talking about? I am so confused right now. You have to tell me, please. Rebecca cried into the phone. Come on home. I'll try to make everything clear when you get here. The phone turned off. Rebecca quickly shoved the phone back into her pocket and made a dash for the exit of the forest. It took her only 5 minutes to get clear of the trees and find her motorcycle. She leapt on and gunned the engine. Normally, the night air and the feel of the motorcycle under her would make her feel comfortable and alive, but the way things were now, after the way she had heard her father talk to her, she knew that something was very wrong. She had to get home, immediately. She took off into the night, ignoring speed limits. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, a sense of danger. There was a threat that she didn't recognize, and that made her worried. Rebecca had spent years learning the secrets of monsters that haunt the night. She could tell you the strengths, weaknesses, and the locations of just about any monster that had ever existed, and she had a method for dealing with them. However, this was a threat that had been able to terrify 3 vampires into silence and rebellion. What kind of creature or danger could frighten an apex predator like a vampire? S, Rebecca muttered. What in the hell are you? Rebecca made it home in just 20 minutes, and the sight of her house made her feel happy. but not comfortable. The fact that her house was still standing, was still in one piece, meant that the threat hadn't reached the house yet. But it didn't mean that the threat wasn't real. Whatever had killed the vampire, Ryan was still out there, and it knew that Rebecca had heard too much. There was no doubt that it would do what it could to silence her, or end her. With this thought fresh in her mind, Rebecca brought her motorcycle to a halt in the garage and ran for the door. "Dad!" she cried as she burst through the doorway. She saw her dad instantly, standing near the door waiting for her. There was a genuine concern in his eyes. "Rebecca, thank God you're all right." He stepped forward and embraced Rebecca warmly. "Listen, we don't have much time." "What are you talking about, Dad? What's going on?" Rebecca demanded. Her father didn't hesitate. He released Rebecca and quickly moved through the house, pulling things off walls and grabbing different items of value. "I haven't got long, sweetie, and there is so much you need to know. I don't even know where to start," he said quickly. Fear gripped Rebecca like a clawing hand. "Who is S?" Rebecca asked. "I don't know," her dad answered. He had grabbed a suitcase and was filling it with clothes. "All I know is this. If this S character can spook a vampire, then it spooks me." "Dad, are you going somewhere?" Rebecca asked. Jonah Anderson stopped packing and sighed. He turned to face Rebecca with a very sad and scared look on his face. "The vampire called you a night angel." "Yes," Rebecca nodded. "What does that mean?" Jonah Anderson turned and sat down on the bed next to the suitcase. He motioned for Rebecca to sit next to him. She ran forward and hugged her father instead. He hugged back, but then sat her next to him. "How old was the vampire that called you a night angel?" "He looked pretty young. He didn't look that old," Rebecca admitted. She hadn't really thought about it, but the vampires he had looked around her age. Vampires age much slower than a normal human, so at the oldest they were probably in their 50s or 60s. Yet that didn't seem right either. They were too inexperienced and juvenile in attitude. They must have been fledgling vampires. They were probably just as old as they looked, around their 20s or 30s at the most. And then it doesn't make sense that he would call you a night angel. "Dad, what is a night angel?" Rebecca cried. "Listen to me, Rebecca." Rebecca locked eyes with her dad. "You need to understand that there was a crash." Rebecca and her dad both looked up at the sound of the noise. It sounded like one of the windows had broken. Rebecca's father leapt to his feet and grabbed the suitcase. He took Rebecca's hand and dragged her to a room on the other side of the house. "Sweetheart, I have to leave," he said quickly. "Dad, what's happening? What's going on?" "I don't have time to explain." He ran for the door, but Rebecca grabbed his arm angrily. "Dad, don't go, please!" Jonah Anderson never cried. Never. The only time Rebecca had ever seen the man tear up was when her mother had been killed, but now his eyes were building up with tears. "Baby, you know I love you more than life itself," he said. Rebecca nodded, choking up. "Do you trust me?" "Yes, sir, I trust you." He rushed forward and hugged Rebecca one more time. "Then I promise you that I won't be gone too long. I need to find answers, and I won't rest until I get them, and I'm back here." "Then I'll go with you," Rebecca cried, trying to fight back her own tears. "No," he said warmly. "If what you've told me is true, then you're needed here. You're the only one who can prevent what's about to happen." "I can't do it without you." There was another crashing. More glass was shattered. Rebecca wouldn't let go of her dad. "You have to, Rebecca. You have to, because you're a night angel." "I still don't know what that means," Rebecca cried. "You have to tell me. You have to explain everything, just like you always would, please." Later, I promise you." He finally pulled away from Rebecca and stepped back. Rebecca could hear noises from the far end of the house. Someone or something was trying to get inside. "I promise that I will explain everything as soon as I can. We just don't have time. You have to trust me." Rebecca hesitated. The thought of losing her father was strong, and it haunted her greatly. She feared the thought of never seeing her smiling face again. However, she also knew that he would keep his promise. Jonah Anderson was a man who kept his word. Rebecca nodded, but the tears still flowed down her eyes. "Goodbye, Dad." He blew her a kiss and then ran out the door. The house was quiet, other than the sound of the intruders trying to break into the house. Rebecca's sadness and confusion suddenly turned to anger. She recognized the noises. They were groans and moans, very familiar ones. "Zombies," Rebecca growled. However, there was something wrong with that statement. Zombies don't pick targets. They act as a swarm to destroy everything in sight. Zombies do not think or plan, they consume. It is their only function and purpose. She reminded herself that. So why were they so intent on attacking her house? Unless they're being directed, Rebecca realized. S, Rebecca snarled. That name sounded so sickening. The simple name inspired such anger and fury within her now. It was what took her father away, and it was what was tearing her family apart. No doubt it was the name that had led the vampires to revolt and what directed the zombies to her house. S. Rebecca climbed to her feet and walked to the den. When she got there, she saw that 2 windows had been broken, and there's a small army of zombies trying to push their way through, groaning and decaying. She reached into her holster and removed her pistol. From the mantelpiece, she grabbed a backup pistol holding one in each hand. She stepped out in front of the window and pointed both pistols out to the small horde. "You can call me a night angel or whatever," she shouted. The zombies didn't hear her. They didn't care about words or speeches. All they cared about was consuming and devouring, but she wasn't talking to the zombies. She was talking to the mysterious name that was causing her suffering. "Whoever you are, you've torn my family apart, and now I'm coming for you." In that instant, a brief feeling came over Rebecca. A slight breeze blew by and through her. It felt like an embrace, like the night itself was holding her, encouraging her, and it was all she needed. She felt alive again. Alive, but still hurt. Like a part of her was taken and stripped away. The night angel opened fire as tears trickled down her cheeks. Get some water real quick. Chapter 6. Rebecca sat in the middle of the den. Her eyes were tired, and her hair was wild and uncombed. She was exhausted, but her body would not sleep. She hadn't even closed her eyes since her father had left. All around her lay the blood and decaying remains of zombies. Her pistols were resting on the coffee table. Both had been emptied of their ammunition, and she would have to renew her ammo. She cursed at herself. She'd always made it a point not to waste ammo, and out of anger she'd done just that. However, the question that egged her on now was one so difficult. Just saying it in her mind wasn't enough. "What do I do now?" Rebecca whispered. This question had never been a real problem for Rebecca to answer. Even after her mother died, her father had been there to help her pick up the pieces. It was him who had explained to her the existence of supernatural creatures. He had taught her, encouraged her, and he had loved her. With him around, Rebecca had never felt more secure. He was all that she had, but now he was gone. The world seemed so much darker now, and it had nothing to do with the night, for the sun was starting to rise in the distance. "What can I do now?" Rebecca rephrased her question. Rebecca felt helpless, unable to do anything of any worth. What did she have to work off of? The children of the night were uneasy and out of control. The vampires were becoming active and the zombies were being controlled, and the only culprit that Rebecca had to go off of was the mysterious name S. It was almost nothing. It didn't help her at all. Rebecca climbed to her feet and walked to the stairs. She climbed up and walked to her room at the far end of the hall. She went to her bed and threw herself on it. Never before had the bed felt so inviting, though. As she lay her face in the pillow, plans and ideas began stewing in her head. She had to think of something to do. Her father had told her to stop the attack, but she didn't know where or when the attack would come. How could she stop something she knew nothing about? And then there was the question of being a night angel. What did that mean? What did that have to do with anything? And what did being a night angel have to do with fighting monsters? Rebecca climbed to her knees and kneeled on the bed. She looked out her bedroom window at the night sky. It was growing more bright as the sun was rising. The stars slowly began to wink out. It had been a beautiful night despite all that had happened, and if she ever needed the comfort of that starry sky, it would have been now. However, she had a feeling that the stars alone wouldn't be enough to revive her and help her this time. What would her dad say? What would he do? Rebecca lowered her head and closed her eyes. Rebecca decided to do something she hadn't done in a while. "God, I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered. Her father had always taught her to pray when he felt lost and uncertain. However, this was the first time she had ever felt that way. She had reached her breaking point. When the world turns its back on you and everything looks hopeless, that's the point where you need to look to God. That was something her father always used to tell her. "My mom is gone, and my dad's gone. I know that you have a plan and everything, but I don't know what to do anymore. Please, help me out." As she prayed, she felt ridiculous. It wasn't because she didn't believe, but it was the fact that she didn't think she was speaking right. When her dad prayed, it was always so formal, and it always mesmerized those that heard him. You could tell he was talking to God. Here she wasn't sure if she was praying correctly. Does God listen to prayers that aren't powerful? Please, God. I'm so lost right now. There was another crash. Rebecca spun around to where the sound had come from. Was it another zombie attack? No. She would have heard more than one crash. However, there was something in her house. Rebecca leapt from her bed and ran to the door. She had left her weapons downstairs, so she would have to use hand-to-hand combat against whatever had snuck in. Rebecca preferred to use weapons, but she wasn't helpless without them. She quietly slipped down the stairs and looked around the corner of the front hall to the den. There was a tall stranger standing in the den. He was looking around with his back to Rebecca. He didn't seem to know that she was there. Rebecca searched for anything that she could use as a weapon against the newcomer. She looked and saw that her pistol was still on the coffee table. If she could move fast enough, she might be able to grab it before the stranger had time to react. Rebecca crouched low and began to creep close to the floor. With each step, she feared that she might alert the stranger, but he never turned around to look at her. She was getting so close. Just a few more steps and she could go for it. I would not do that if I were you. Rebecca froze. The man turned around to look at her, and she finally saw the stranger for who he was. He had on a black, double-breasted suit with a red tie and pleated pants. He looked very professional, almost like a lawyer. His eyes were deep red and his hair was of deep gray. He had razor-sharp fangs as he smiled, and his face was pale. By human standards, he looked almost 40. However, by vampire standards, he was probably much older than that. Not another one of you, Rebecca growled. I've had my fill of you bloodsuckers for one night. The vampire frowned. How interesting you are, Night Angel, he growled. Rebecca noticed he had a thick Russian accent. You are staring death in the face, and you do not show fear. The truth was that Rebecca didn't have time to show fear. Her mind was filled with valuables and options. Could she possibly make it to her pistol before the vampire could? Would she be able to overpower him if he couldn't? The odds were against her. You know what? If you're going to feed on me, get it over with. I've had a pretty bad night. The vampire nodded. I am aware, the vampire snarled. It has been a very trying night for you, Night Angel. Rebecca felt a flash of anger being called that name again. However, she couldn't help but notice that the vampire hadn't chosen to attack her. So are you going to kill me or not? Rebecca snapped. The vampire cocked his head to the side. No, he said. Susan would be quite unhappy with me if I were to feed on her daughter. Rebecca's world seemed to pause at those words. What did you say? It is remarkable. You just look so much like your mother, the vampire replied. Rebecca felt like she had been hit hard in the stomach. The air was not from her lungs, and she felt lightheaded. Everything seemed to be swirling. Her knees were weak. How? What? The vampire shook his head. It seems that this is a bit too much for you to handle, Night Angel. Suddenly, Rebecca noticed that the vampire was distracted. He wasn't paying attention to the pistol on the coffee table next to him. Rebecca saw her chance. She moved in the blink of an eye. She dove for the coffee table and grabbed her pistol. With each passing second, she expected the vampire to swipe at her or try to resist, but nothing happened. In fact, the vampire merely leapt away from her as she dove for the gun. He wasn't trying to stop her at all. What's going on? Rebecca spun and aimed her gun at the vampire. If you're trying to mess with my head, bloodsucker, Rebecca snarled, I swear that I'll splatter your head all over the wall. The vampire stared at Rebecca. It wasn't threatening, but he almost seemed annoyed. Go ahead. Shoot me, the vampire said. Rebecca was very tempted to kill him, to pull the trigger and put an end to it all. However, something was stopping her. Not until I get some answers. Who the hell are you? The vampire inhaled deeply and then bowed. Yuri Sobetskaya, he said professionally. Rebecca nodded in reply. If you're not here to kill me, what do you want? Rebecca asked. Your father sent me. Rebecca laughed. Bullshit, she snapped. My dad would never call a vampire to come and find me. Probably not, but he might call a friend, Yuri answered. Rebecca almost lowered her pistol in shock. Your father is a close friend of mine, Rebecca. As was your mother, Susan. You're lying to me, Rebecca shouted. Yuri shook his head and reached into his back pocket, removing a wallet. He opened it and pulled a small photo out. He held it up for Rebecca to see. In it, there were 3 people. One looked like a much more human and friendlier Yuri with tan skin and no fangs. Next to him was Jonah, her father, wearing a tuxedo. And next to her father, in a beautiful wedding dress, was... Mom? Rebecca cried. I was bitten and turned into a vampire only a few weeks after this picture was taken, Yuri explained. Your father saved me from myself. Rebecca couldn't stand it any longer. She collapsed on the sofa behind her and dropped her pistol. Yuri stepped around and sat down in the chair across from it. My mom and dad were friends with a vampire?" Rebecca cried. Yuri smiled sadly and leaned back in the chair. "What do you want with me?" Rebecca asked desperately. Yuri gave Rebecca a very concerned look. "I do not have long, Rebecca. It won't be long before the enemies close in. We only have until the dawn. I'm trying to get you out of here." All right, Chapter 7. "We must move quickly," Yuri said forcefully. Rebecca didn't move. She was still processing what had been revealed to her. How could her mom and dad both be friends with a vampire? Her whole life, Dad had told her how vicious and unpredictable vampires were. Her first instinct was to believe Yuri was lying, but that didn't explain the picture he had. Her father clearly knew who he was, and clearly they were close. "Where to?" "North," Yuri answered. "This place is too dangerous. For all I know, her agents could already be after you." "Her?" I asked. Yuri froze and growled. "Who is her?"
"That's not important right now. What is important is that we leave. Get your equipment."
"My equipment?" I asked in a daze.
"Yes, your weapons, survival tools, everything you use to hunt monsters," Yuri barked.
I quickly followed his instructions and ran up to her room to grab her stuff. As she grabbed for her tools, Rebecca began to question what was going on now. Why did Yuri want to run? What was there running from? She brushed those thoughts aside as she grabbed her equipment. After she grabbed everything, she rushed downstairs to find Yuri by the door. "All right, I'm ready. Let's go."
"Not yet," Yuri hissed.
She paused and glared at him. "You know what? You're lucky that I haven't fired on you. If you think you can just keep ordering me around like this, you've..."
"Hush!" Yuri snapped. "There is a small horde of zombies on the other side of the door."
Rebecca stopped talking quickly and listened. Sure enough, she could make out the soft groaning of the undead lurching around just behind the door. "Okay, then we'll go to the garage and get my motorcycle," she offered.
"That abomination you call a vehicle?" "No thanks," Yuri groaned.
"Sorry that my tastes don't suit yours. What do you recommend then?"
"I have a car out front."
"I don't like cars, too enclosed and restrictive," she teased.
"We don't have time to be picky," Yuri hissed.
"Said the vampire who doesn't like motorcycles." She sat back.
Yuri growled and looked away. "You really are just like Susan, always."
Yuri never finished because suddenly the door moved, as a zombie must have slammed itself into it. Yuri quickly braced himself and held the door shut.
"All right, let's just call a truce for now and help each other, all right?" Yuri offered.
"What do you want me to do?"
"Are you prepared to fight?" Yuri asked.
She nodded and pulled out a pair of pistols, but Yuri shook his head.
"Save your ammunition. You will face far more dangerous beasts than zombies."
Rebecca glared at me and put away the pistols. "Maybe you should tell me what I will be facing." "You?" Yuri looked at her and then sighed.
"Listen, I wish I could tell you, but we don't have time. I will help you, Night Angel, if you only let me."
"Enough with this Night Angel business. My name, you blood guzzler, is Rebecca Anderson." Rebecca sneered. Yuri nodded and gave a smile.
"Very well, Miss Anderson. Now, would you mind?" Yuri asked politely.
Rebecca rolled her eyes and went to the door. Beside the door was a cane holder, which had 1 or 2 canes in it, but it also had a machete, intended for such purposes as this. She pulled it out and walked to the door, opening it up. There were at least a dozen moaning freaks outside. Rebecca recognized none of them, which made things much easier for her, as she walked down the front steps, decapitating heads and cutting into decaying flesh. Rebecca had learned a few things about swordsmanship, and while a machete wasn't really a sword, it served purposes fine. With each slash of the blade, she felt her frustration ebb away from her body and came to bear on the monsters in front of her. She glared at the last zombie, its mindless and emotionless face just lumbering towards her, hell-bent on destroying and consuming Rebecca. It was its only drive, its only purpose. It didn't care that it had slaughtered all of its kind. It didn't care that Rebecca was holding a weapon. In fact, it didn't care at all that she was a night angel, whatever that was supposed to be. Frankly, Rebecca was glad for that. She kicked it hard into the stomach and watched it stumble. Rebecca then moved forward with blinding speed and slashed across its face with the machete. With a low groan, it collapsed in a heap, finally staying dead. Rebecca turned to see that the other zombies were already decaying into dust before her eyes. Yuri walked out and smiled.
"Well done," he noted.
"You expected less?"
"Of course not," Yuri assured her. "But are we not out of the woods yet? We must leave."
I turned and marched him and handed him the bloody machete in my backpack. "Then you can carry this because I'm getting on my motorcycle." Yuri started to protest, but Rebecca was already walking away. Rebecca didn't need to hear him right now. She had other things on her mind. She wrapped her bow over her shoulder and strapped her belt around her back. She checked to make sure that she had everything needed immediately. She grabbed her bow, arrows. She grabbed everything she could. She strapped these to her side and shoulder, and as she climbed onto the bike, she started the engine and looked up to see Yuri standing in front of her. "Miss Anderson," he asked. "Call me Rebecca, damn it," she snapped. "Sorry, but your father asked me to keep you safe." "So?" she questioned. "I'm afraid I cannot do that." I cocked my eyebrow and started to reach for her pistol. But Rebecca knew that it wouldn't be fast enough if he decided to attack. "I'm not strong enough to." "What are you talking about?" "I'm taking you north, where you will meet up with another ally of your father's, an old friend." "You know, my dad seems to have a lot more friends than I thought," she growled, wondering if she should be blaming Yuri or her dad. "Listen, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise you that I mean you no harm. I want to help you. I owe a great debt to your father." "Okay, then let's stop chatting and just get going. I'll follow you." She fired up the engine and looked away from him. Yuri had a sad expression, but nodded. Rebecca felt a twinge of guilt as he walked to his nearby car. She might have been a little hard on him, but then again, everyone seemed to be keeping secrets from her now, and she wasn't exactly in a friendly mood. Rebecca heard a car engine start and knew that she needed to start moving as well. As she made her way out of the garage, she saw the darkness and saw the lights of an SUV starting to move away. She tailed them, falling just far enough away that she felt comfortable. Her hands tightened on the handlebars and was careful to stay behind him. Her eyes watered against the wind, and she felt her body shiver against the night chill. She then realized that she didn't pack any clothing for this trip, but that was not a major concern right now. Rebecca brushed the flying strands of hair out of her face and gunned the motor, sending her forward, closing in on the car. It felt like the closer she got to the car, the closer he got to steering away questions. But just like the questions, the car seemed elusive and out of reach. The only answers that Rebecca had included were where she was going, the vague direction of north, and also the fact that she was being hunted by someone, or rather, something. What was hunting her was something that frightened vampires and could direct zombies. What was she running from? And why did it want her? Was it because she was some sort of night angel? Why did Dad seem so frustrated about it? Why wasn't she getting straight answers? There was one thing she knew for certain, though. A fact that she knew without a shadow of a doubt. "I won't be hunted or intimidated by you anymore. You've got my attention, so I'm hunting you now, S." All right. Moving on to Chapter 8. All right. Now, I will go ahead and warn you here. Like I said, this was a relatively new story for me. So, at this point in the story, I make a shift. You will notice that instead of reading in the third person, it shifts to the first person. This was a mistake on my part. I got very used to writing in my own voice, and that means that I often wrote in the first person. So don't be surprised if you hear me reading in the first person a whole lot in this story, because I somehow switched. Raven, you went ahead of chapters 1 and 6. Oh, did y'all want me to stop? I thought since we still had time, I thought I'd read a little further. But if y'all want me to stop, I can. See, the thing is, I put chapters 1 and 6 was because that was what I thought we would reach. I thought we would only get to chapter 6, but we went faster than I thought, so I thought I'd read a little further. But if you want me to stop at chapter 7, then we can, and we can pick up 8 next time. All right, chapter 8. Looks like people want me to keep going. It took about 4 hours of constant driving and navigation. Yuri was a very careful driver, but he was slow, too slow for my taste. Apparently he was trying to make sure that I would stay safe and close behind him. A nice thought, but like Dad, he seemed to think I couldn't take care of myself. Perhaps he forgot that I'd been hunting supernatural creatures since I was old enough to aim a gun? I didn't know. There was a lot of things I didn't know anymore. Why did the vampires start consorting? Why were zombies suddenly organized? Who was S? Why did my father have so many mysterious friends? And what on earth is a night angel? I needed answers, and Yuri sure wasn't going to give them to me willingly. When we finally parked at a hotel, I was more than happy to dismount the motorcycle. Yuri climbed out of his car and walked to me cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked me in his thick accent. "I've been chased out of my home. My dad is off on some mysterious quest. I was nearly killed twice tonight, and I still don't know what's going on. Other than that, I couldn't be better," I snapped. Yuri sighed and lowered his head. "I apologize, Rebecca," he muttered. "I know that all of this is, unexpected." "No kidding. Why are we here? Is this where we meet my dad's friend?" I asked. "No. Joshua is still too far away. I suspect we shall have to go further north before we meet him," Yuri said. At the name Joshua, I stopped. I remembered as a little girl my father had mentioned someone named Joshua, but had never spoken of him openly or towards me. Sometimes it was over the phone, and other times he would mutter the name, but I was never told much about him. Could this be that same Joshua? I didn't want to assume anything, as I was still uncertain about anything, but this was the first piece of information that I had obtained thus far. The name of my father's friend. I didn't let on this, though. If I did, it might cause Yuri to be even more careful about what he said, and I needed him to have a loose lip right now. "I see. So what are we here for?"
"We're spending the day here," he stated.
"What?"
"You are able to travel in daylight. I am not," Yuri explained. "We shall rest here until dusk. Then we shall take the road again."
I crossed my arms. "And what am I supposed to do?" I asked.
"You're free to do as you please, but you must not leave the hotel. You need to stay near me."
"I'm not a little girl, Yuri," I hissed. However, I took off my weapons and stashed them away, knowing that there was little point in arguing. As much as I hated it, Yuri was all I had now, and it was best to play by his rules. The sun was starting to rise, so Yuri quickly escorted me into the building. We checked into a room on the 3rd floor and closed the blinds, making sure no light could get in. No sooner had the blinds been shut than Yuri collapsed on the bed, completely exhausted.
"I must sleep now. I would ask that you wake me at sunset."
"Yeah, take your beauty nap then," I mumbled, sitting down on the other bed next to his. Yuri closed his eyes and fell asleep as I simply stared out the window. I lay back on the bed and sighed. I felt tired, but I knew that sleep would be impossible. Not with all this on my mind. Then suddenly I froze. A cold chill went down my spine, and my breath turned a cloud. There was something wrong. A strange entity. I sat up fast and looked around. Something else had entered the room. I felt naked and exposed without my weapons near me, but I had to make do with what I had. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was doing, but it was here, and it was aware of me. "Calm down, Rebecca. Calm down and trust your instincts," I said shakily, trying to calm myself. "First, identify what you're up against." I climbed out of my bed and looked around me. My breath was foggy, my room was cold, and there was a very strong emotional weight. I could feel it, an odd heaviness on my shoulders. It felt like sadness. "Okay, a ghost," I whispered. I had only encountered ghosts once or twice, but I knew enough about them to know that they were capable of. When a person dies, sometimes they can't let go of their earthly connection. They're tied to the mortal world by anger, sadness, or something that they treasure. When this happens, their spirit remains until they can finally be at peace. When a ghost is present, the area they inhabit goes cold, and they usually leave behind an aura of emotion that can be felt. So there was a ghost in the room. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a container of salt and unscrewed the top. Though I could not see the ghost, I knew how to keep it away. Salt is a pure mineral, and spirits can't touch it. I poured salt into my hand and held it ready, watching and waiting for any sign of movement. "Come out," I whispered. "I'm not afraid of you." There was a moment of silence, when suddenly I saw the slightest of movement move past the kitchen doorway. I threw the salt at the movement, and I heard a yelp as something was forced to leap away. I smiled and grabbed another handful of salt. "Please don't do that again!" I stopped at the sound of the voice. It wasn't a scary or bloody-sounding voice. It didn't sound angry or vengeful. It was A child's voice, scared and sad. "Who are you?" I called. "It hurts," the voice moaned. I lowered my hand and poured the salt in front of me, showing that my hands were empty. "I won't do it again. Just talk to me." I spoke softly, but I wasn't a fool. If the ghost was trying to fool me into lowering my guard, he was mistaken. The salt at my feet would keep him away from me, so any attack would be known to me. However, no attack came. Instead, I heard soft sniffling. "I'm scared," the voice whimpered. I knelt down, facing the direction of the voice. "Show yourself," I whispered. "I promise I'm not going to hurt you." There was a long pause, and finally, a boy appeared in front of me. He had long black hair, a bloody buttoned shirt. He looked no older than maybe 10 or 11 years old, if that. He looked at me scared, cowering in the corner. When he turned his head, I could see that where his right eye should have been was an empty and bloody hole. "Who are you?" I asked. "I don't have a name," the boy answered, "but I've been called Todd before." "All right, Todd," I said warmly, feeling no anger or threat from the boy. "What are you doing here?" "I died in this building," the boy answered. "So you know that you're dead?" I asked. The boy nodded. "I've been dead a long time," he said. "Well, why haven't you passed on?" I asked. The boy shrugged and walked to the door and stared at it. "I'm waiting," he whispered. I cocked my head to the side and walked a little closer. "What are you waiting on?" "On Daddy to get home," he said. "Your daddy?" I asked. "Mommy said that Daddy would never come home, but I never believed her," he explained with a smile. "Daddy was always leaving for a long time. He was a Marine, you know. He would always go off for a long time, but he'd always promise to come home someday, and he'd walk right through that door. And he always..." The boy trailed off, and a tear ran down his face. I watched him for a moment, and he rubbed his eye. "So your father left for a tour of duty?" I asked. "Mommy begged him not to go, but he had to. He said that it was duty to his country and to us," Todd said with a smile. "I was sad, but I knew he'd be back." I knelt down and looked at Todd. "Todd, when was this?" I asked. Todd turned to stare at me through his one eye. "Dad said he was going to a place called Vietnam." I breathed out in horror. His father was a Vietnam soldier. "And when did you..." I started to ask. But Todd seemed to already know what I was going to say. 9 months after he left. A man came to the door wearing a uniform like Daddy's," Todd answered. "Mommy cried a long time, and I didn't know why. Then one day she pulled out a knife and..." He pointed to his eye. "And she stabbed herself, too." "So your mom's dead," Todd added. "Mm-hmm," he mumbled. I knelt down next to Todd and sighed. "Todd, I don't know how to say this, but your dad is probably dead," I whispered. Todd turned and looked at me for a long time. "Look, if he was in Vietnam, he was probably killed, and you won't see him again. He's not coming home." "I know," Todd answered. "I think I always know," Todd said sadly. "But he promised me. He promised he'd come home. And he's never broken a promise before." I felt a tear roll down my cheek as well. That's what my own father was like. He'd never keep secrets, never break a promise, always there for me, but now he was gone too. Was I going to be like Todd? Always chasing a silly idea that he'll one day come back to me and everything will be okay? No. Somehow, like Todd, I knew that I couldn't break back the past. I couldn't bring my mom back to life. I couldn't make my dad come back. I knew it was impossible. "Todd, this building used to be an apartment complex, right?" "Mm-hmm. They tore it down and rebuilt it as a hotel a few years ago." "And you've stayed here ever since?" "Mm-hmm," Todd repeated. "So what have you been..." I stopped a moment. I was going to ask Todd what he'd been holding on to, what he'd kept him tied to this world, but I knew already what it was. The promise his dad made him was what tied him. He couldn't let it go. And I couldn't bear to see this child go through such pain. I had to do something for him. I had to help him somehow. Just then, I thought of something crazy. I wasn't sure if it would work, or if it would even make things better. However, I could only hope that Todd would finally be able to file at peace. I walked over and sat down next to Todd.
Hey, I whispered, I don't know your dad, but I'll bet that he loved you a lot. Yeah, Todd said. So maybe he wants you to find him, I offered. Maybe he's waiting on you. Todd turned and looked at me and thought about that. But how do I find him? Todd asked me. I smiled and went close. Okay, try to use your imagination, all right? Close your eyes, and I'll take you to him. Todd nodded and closed his eye tight, shaking a little. I leaned forward and wrapped my arms around him. His body was cold to the touch, like ice, but I didn't let go. I gripped him hard and firmly, the same way my own father would hold me when I was scared. I felt him tremble a little. My theory was that if a ghost exists between the balance of the mortal world and the afterlife, perhaps they could be made to visualize things from the beyond. I just had to convince him that he could. Todd, tell me what you see. He didn't answer at first. Do you see a light? I waited for his answer, praying he didn't think what I said was too cliché. I think so, he stammered. Okay, focus on that. Listen. Listen closely. Do you hear anything? I think your dad may be calling you. I shut my own eyes, hoping that he did, praying that he did. He paused for a long moment. And suddenly I felt him relaxing in my grip. I hear him. I hear Daddy! I sighed with relief. Don't be afraid, Todd. Go on. Go to him, I whispered. Todd suddenly slung his arms around my neck and beamed happily. Thank you, lady, he laughed. My name's Rebecca, I answered, hugging back. Now go, get going. Suddenly I felt the air go warm, and the figure in my arms vanished into nothingness. I looked to see that Todd had disappeared. Had he passed on to the afterlife? Did he go to be with his dad? I couldn't be sure, but I knew that he had ended up being very happy. He was at peace. I smiled at myself and stood back up. The salt on the floor needed sweeping away, so I reached over to grab a broom in the kitchen, still beaming to myself. I saw that. I spun around to see Yuri sitting by the bed. Saw what? I demanded.
What you did for that ghost. How you helped him rest in peace, Yuri chuckled. I knew that you were gifted, young lady, but to be able to calm a restless spirit like that takes talent.
What are you talking about? I demanded.
Yuri sat up straight and grinned. You have a very special connection with the supernatural. It's not a coincidence, Rebecca. It's part of being a night angel.
I put the broom aside and glared at him. Do tell.
That's why the ghost boy came to you and revealed himself to you. He felt you, and he could sense that you were unique. He probably wasn't even aware that you were a night angel, but he knew that you weren't a normal person. You may not realize it yet, Rebecca, but you have a very special gift. And it's this gift that makes you a night angel.
Well, that's amazing, but you still haven't told me exactly what a night angel is, I snapped.
Yuri sighed and looked down. I can't tell you what a night angel is because I'm not really sure myself. I know what they are capable of. I know what they can do. And I know that they are rare and powerful today, but I don't know what exactly they are or how they come to be, Yuri explained. I groaned and leaned against the kitchen sink.
So I'm still in the dark, I snarled.
Well, not entirely, Yuri sighed. You have used your gift for a good cause.
Maybe if I knew more about these gifts and what I could do with them, maybe I could be more sure of myself.
Yuri nodded. Well, I'm not the one who could tell you that.
Then who can tell me about this stuff? Yuri gave me a very serious look.
The only person who can give you your answers is the same person we're looking for, Yuri said. Joshua Raines.
Need another drink real quick? The sun was soon high in the sky, and Yuri had gone back to sleep. He slept silently in the far side of the bedroom, avoiding the rays of light coming in through the window. Being a vampire clearly wasn't all it was cracked up to be. After all, I hunt them. I was restless, trying to think of what all I could do with Yuri got his beauty sleep. Yuri had warned me not to leave the hotel since he wouldn't be there to protect me, like I needed it. I cleaned my gun, changed the magazine, and twirled it in my hand. My trigger finger was itchy and I wanted to shoot something. Anything. Some would call me a troubled young lady, I guess, but I call it more of a unique quirkiness. It was something I did whenever I was lost in thought. My thoughts were on Todd and about what Yuri had said. Why had Todd shown himself to me and trusted me so quickly? Yuri had said that it was because I was supposedly a night angel and that monsters and night angels were connected in some odd way. However, despite knowing this information, he still stood by the same bullshit story that he didn't know anything about night angels. He said that Joshua would be able to help me and explain my purpose as a night angel, but how would he know anything more than that? And for that matter, how come this Joshua was so special? Was he a vampire too? Was he a monster hunter? There was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" I answered without thinking. My fingers tightened around my pistol, prepared to shoot whatever came in. "Room service?" The voice was female and had a slight accent to it. I lowered my gun and stuffed it under the pillow. Yeah, come in," I answered. The woman then walked in looking about 35 years old, and she had black hair tied in a ponytail. She was black with brown eyes, and she was rather thin in appearance. She was pushing a cart with a white tarp over it that had wine and other such luxuries on it. "It's very dark in here, ma'am," the woman said. "Should I open a window?" "No," I said, thinking of Yuri. "My uncle is sleeping, and I think he'd prefer not to be disturbed." "Oh, all right." The woman went about her work before continuing. "When did you and your uncle come in?" "Last night," I answered. I didn't like people being snoopy about my business. "Oh, yes, I was only curious. You can help yourself to anything on the cart, ma'am." She carried on her work, not looking in my direction anymore. She began to sweep up the remaining salt from the floor as I slowly put my gun back in my bag while she wasn't looking. I watched her work for a few moments, and then began to drift back into my thoughts. I looked over at the wine on the cart and smirked as I considered how similar it looked to blood that Yuri would drink. But then I began to realize that Yuri wouldn't have ordered wine. Even if he would, he'd been asleep since we arrived. He never ordered it. "We never ordered room service," I said. I grabbed my gun as quickly as I could, my fingers brushing the handle, when suddenly I saw my bag fly across the room as if on a string being yanked to the wall by an invisible force. The woman who'd been cleaning the salt to the floor suddenly collapsed on the floor unconscious. "Well, I should have botched up that plan." I turned at the sound of the voice and saw something come out from under the cart. A little creature with long, pointy ears and a crooked nose crawled out. He had yellow, beady eyes and pointy, fanged teeth. He had a green-tinted skin, and he was wearing what looked like a green business-style suit with a white tie. He was the oddest thing I'd ever looked at. "I should have known that you'd catch on." This day is getting weirder by the minute. First I check into a hotel with a ghost boy, and now little green men are showing up in my room. Yes, I'm sure you must be very confused, and rest assured that I shall explain everything in good time. He jumped up in the air and landed on top of the cart. He grabbed the wine bottle and popped it open, taking a swig. "What exactly are you, anyway?" "My friends call me Morgan, which would be true if I had any friends," he said snidely. Tell you what, be my friend, and you can call me Morgan." "I'll call you moving target if you don't start answering me," I snapped. Temper, my dear," he tuttered. "What I am is hard to say. Some humans would call me an imp, a goblin, more recently referred to as leprechauns. Oh, that creative ideas you humans come up with. A leprechaun." A leprechaun. I was looking at a leprechaun. Normally, I wouldn't say that anything was impossible, considering that I made a hobby out of hunting zombies, vampires, and monsters, but leprechauns, that was a bit too much. "Okay, you really expect me to believe that leprechauns are real?" I demanded. "No, of course not," he cackled. "But I do expect you to believe that I am real, and that, whether I'm a leprechaun or not, you'll hear what I have to say." "And if I refuse?" "Then feel free to shoot me," Morgan chuckled. He waved his finger, and suddenly the bag holding my gun, which had flown away from me, came flying back to me until it landed on my feet. "Take up your gun and put one right between my eyes. I assure you, it won't kill me. And I also assure you that it will just prove to waste one another's time." As much as I hated to admit it, Morgan was really clever. If he really was a leprechaun, then there was no doubt a normal bullet wouldn't kill him. If the legends were true, only a four-leaf clover could kill a leprechaun, but who knew if those legends were true? From what Morgan said, his kind weren't even considered leprechauns until just recently. I sighed and sat down in my bed, again glaring at the little green man. "Okay, I'm listening." "Excellent!" Morgan laughed, taking another drink from the wine bottle. "I'm glad you're being so agreeable. Hypnotizing that maid wasn't that easy." "So leprechauns can hypnotize people." "We're familiar with the arcane arts, young lady," Morgan shrugged. "However, I didn't come here to discuss leprechaun lore and power with you. I came here to discuss the matter of this S character.
and what your father is doing about it. I stopped and stared at the little green leprechaun, and I grabbed my gun from my bag. I didn't care if it did nothing. I was outraged. How could this creature know more about what was going on than I did? How did Yuri? How did my father? How come I'm the only one in the dark all the time? Tell me everything, I snarled. Morgan tilted the bottle and drank from it before beginning. I can't tell you who S is, but I can tell you that he's trying to start a revolution in the monster underworld. How do you mean? I asked. Haven't you noticed the strange activities that have been going on here lately? The vampires are consorting in the open rather than in secret. Zombies are being selective about their targets as if being directed. Cats and dogs are living together. Ha! Now Leprechaun is sitting and having a drink with a human. You can't deny that things have gotten rather, entertaining around here, if I may say. Why? What's it all for? I asked desperately. Well, how should I know, lass? He responded darkly. All I know is that this S person has flipped his lid. And how do you know about him? I ordered. I get around. And if what I've heard is true, then this S character is bad news to the highest degree. It sounds like this when the world really needs a night angel. I finally took a step forward anxiously. There were the magic words again. What is a night angel? I demanded. Please, I have to know what it is. The leprechaun Morgan leaned back and picked his nose nonchalantly. What you're asking is an impossible question to answer, he said. Nobody knows what a night angel truly is except for the night angels themselves. Humans who know about them have theories about what they are, and monsters have their own myths and legends. But the fact is, anyone you ask will have a different answer to that question. I plopped down on the bed and shrieked. No one knows! So no one knows what I am! Oh, I do, Morgan said calmly. Then what? You're Rebecca Anderson, Morgan answered. I paused and looked at him dumbfounded. But everyone keeps saying that I'm not human. What is a human anyway? Morgan asked. What makes you any different from me? What makes that maid on the floor any different from the vampire in the other room? I started to answer, but found myself biting my own tongue. I don't know. We both talk. We both walk. We both have opinions and speak about them. But the only difference between you and me is that my appearance and attributes have labeled me. After all, you humans can't stop giving me labels. I started off being called an imp. Now I'm a charming little Irishman who's always after me pot of gold, he cackled, now slightly drunk. Despite being delirious, there was wisdom behind his words. Rebecca leaned forward, giving a small smile to the leprechaun. Thanks, she muttered. Oh, don't thank me just yet, darling, he laughed. I didn't just come here to offer information, I came with a warning. A warning? I asked. Morgan nodded and jumped down from the cart. The vampire you took here didn't cover his tracks very well, Morgan said. However, I think that was by design. To keep the demons off your father's trail. Regardless of his reasons, they're coming for you, and will be here for you by nightfall in a few hours. They're waiting for you, and the vampire to leave so that they can kill you on your way out the door. Who? I asked in horror. Who's following us? Oh, my guess. A ghoul. Maybe a team of vampires. Or perhaps it could be a troll. Maybe it's Santa Claus. Whoever it is, you best be ready to fight your way out tonight. I nodded and began pulling out my weapons. And why are you doing all this, Morgan? What do you get out of helping me? Morgan smirked and began walking to the door. Is it wrong to just do a good deed once in a while? He asked mysteriously. Maybe I'm just a good Samaritan. Maybe I really care about you and your father. Maybe I want the monster world to stay in balance. Or, more likely, I'm just the kind of guy who gets bored of watching things remain stagnant and I want to see things shake up a bit. Maybe a little chaos once in a while. So which is it? Does it matter? He laughed as he opened the door and walked out. I'd worry less about my hand to play in all this and what more about the cards in your own hand right now, lass. After all, it's your deal. He then disappeared out the door. I stood, lost and confused, in the middle of my own hotel room. The maid on the floor was slowly starting to wake up. I wanted to say something. Do something. But I didn't know anything that would be right. How had everything spiraled out of control like this? Did the leprechaun I had just seen answer any of my questions, or had he only left me with more? The fact of the matter was that I didn't know what I was anymore, and I didn't know what I was going to do. My only hope was that Yuri would wake up soon and we could escape here. The only person with any answers now was this mysterious Joshua Raines, and I needed to find him soon. I had to. I had to know what I was and what I was supposed to do with myself. You're Rebecca Anderson. I'm Rebecca Anderson. I repeated the phrase, and I felt determination return to my voice and my body. I am Rebecca Anderson. Now that, at least, was an answer I could hold in my heart. All right, we are on chapter 10.
I think we can read this chapter and then call it there.
One second. All right.
Here we go. Chapter 10. Sometime after Morgan left, I must have fallen asleep because I suddenly woke up at the knocking at my door once again. I sat up in my bed and looked to the door. I stood again and walked to it, looking out the peephole. I wasn't going to take any risks this time. The sun had fallen, and the only light was the light from the lamp inside my room, but I could still see that there was an old man outside wearing a hotel employee suit. "Is anyone there?" I asked. "Who is it?" I called. "I'm the front desk clerk, ma'am," he said. I opened the door slightly and sighed with relief to see that he wasn't armed or carrying any heavy material that would possibly hold a weapon. "What is it?" I asked. "I was asked to come here by your uncle. He said that he'd run out for a quick bite, and that he'd be back shortly," the man said. I groaned and leaned against the door frame. "Yeah, I figured he might do that. Thanks for letting me know," I said. The man nodded and walked away. I closed the door behind me and walked back to the bed, sitting down. I reached my bag fully loaded with weapons, but grabbed for a small zipper and pulled out a bag of crackers. I was always prepared in case I needed to eat while hunting. "I shouldn't be surprised," I whispered darkly. "Yuri's a vampire. After all, he has to feed." Even so, I couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. Though he was a vampire and someone that I didn't fully know, he was still a friend of Dad's, and he'd done a lot for my sake. I guess I'd forgotten what he was. I pushed those thoughts aside and grabbed a tomahawk, silver knife, and pistol. If Yuri was going to go out hunting, then I'd take a look around as well. Morgan had warned me that there were creatures out looking for us and that they were closing in. If that was true, I wanted to know exactly what I was up against. So, let's go hunting. I walked out of the hotel and wandered towards a small body of trees at the south side of the building. If there were any creatures of the night waiting to strike, they would be in this small area. I gripped the tomahawk tightly, ready for an attack. I didn't normally carry this weapon, but I couldn't afford to carry many larger, more efficient weapons. They would just slow me down or make people ask questions. It's easy to search the forest for beasts because there are no ignorant police who will ask you why you're just walking around with a high-powered bow with a silver-tipped arrow. If only law enforcement were more understanding of the supernatural. I paused for a moment as I entered the trees in the shade of the limbs. I looked at the tree on the leaves on the ground and the dirt to see that it was a slightly disturbed area. Something had been here recently. I looked around for evidence of what it was. If it was just a human, there was no point in getting worked up. I stepped quietly along through the woods and kept my senses wary. There was something here. I could feel it. But was it a threat? Or was I just becoming paranoid? "Who's the hunter and who's the hunted?" I whispered. "Am I hunting you or are you hunting me?" I felt my nerves start to build up and began to shiver. Though I was in the night, I felt out of my element. The clouds covered the moon overhead, and there was such a lack of light. I always felt comforted by the moon when I was hunting, like it was watching over me in a strange way. Without it, I felt exposed. The snap of twigs, rustling of leaves caught my ears as I spun, gun drawn in the direction of the noise. There was something moving within the trees and on the ground. What was after me? My hands trembled slightly, and in that moment I saw it. It was enormous, standing at least 8 feet tall. It was covered in brown fur, and it walked on 2 legs like a human, but its body hunched over awkwardly like a gorilla. It made loud and feral grunts and growling sounds as it lumbered around the trees. I backed up and leapt behind a tree, eyeing the beast. It hadn't noticed me yet, but it sensed me. It was searching. "What is a troll doing here?" I whispered. "Bigfoot is a myth. Those creatures that people see in the woods from time to time that people refer to as Bigfoot or Yeti in reality are trolls. They live alone and are normally docile creatures, despite being primarily carnivorous. They have been known to eat humans, but they're skilled hunters and are great at sneaking up on and ambushing their prey. This is why few people ever see trolls, because they're masters of evasion despite being so big. The fact that I could not only see this one, but see it in an area so close to public civilization meant that it was not here by choice. Something had brought it here. The beast sniffed the air and let out a growl, moving swiftly and silently through the bushes. I put my pistol away. A mere pistol wouldn't be able to go through the hide of a troll. Nothing less than a shotgun would do the trick. I was in danger. My only weapon that I might do some good was the tomahawk, but going toe-to-toe with a troll was a suicide attempt. I set back to make a dash back for the hotel to get a stronger weapon. Snap. I froze as I realized I just stepped on a large branch. The troll grunted and turned its big, ugly head around to see me. Its beady yellow eyes fell on me and narrowed furiously, and its fangs drooled hungrily. It had found me. I turned and ran fast, but I knew that it was pointless. Trolls had massive strength and speed. It would catch me eventually. The back of my brain was struggling to piece together why a troll, which usually be found in a mountain cave or in a dark cavern somewhere, would be wandering around near a hotel. What had led it here? Could it have been S? Could S command trolls now? I let out a scream, and as I stumbled, as the beast let out a roar and took a swipe at me, I ripped my tomahawk from its loop and ready to fight. I backed up against a fir tree and stared down at the big, ugly brute. It reeked of death and of carnage. It glared furiously, and its teeth were stained red with blood. "Stay back!" I shouted. If I only had a stronger gun or my machete or something heavy, something strong, anything. But I had nothing. I swung my tomahawk at it, but it merely stepped around me and swung its massive hand at my face. I screamed and ducked the blow, seeing bits of the tree's bark go flying off as the beast shook the entire tree with a swipe. "I'm dead," I whimpered. "I'm so dead. I can't believe it. I'm about to die." I'd always wondered what death would feel like and what would happen. I kind of figured that I'd likely die from my hunting monsters, but I didn't think it would happen this soon. "It's going to kill me. I'm going to die." I felt the tomahawk drop out of my hand, and I braced myself for the end. It was the strangest feeling I'd ever had. The clouds above shifted lazily away, exposing a beautiful half moon. It shone down on me like a heavenly beacon. With its light bathed over me, the sensation took hold. My body felt alive. I felt a power inside me that grew stronger in my blood and my bones. It was like being born again, like I was hunting just another monster. Out of weapons, out of ideas. It was just another challenge. The beast attacked with a furious roar. I leapt out of its way and snatched the tomahawk from the ground. It turned and tried to grab my arm. I smirked, sidestepping its clumsy advance, and swinging the axe down on its forearm. It didn't cut all the way through, but it was buried deep in the monster's arm. With an agonizing roar and a pain-filled howl, the monster lumbered away from me. I snarled at its attempted escape. My prey was getting away. I snatched up my gun and fired off 2 rounds at its head. The troll roared in pain, though the bullets did little more than cause some head trauma. I rushed forward and threw all my strength into a body tackle. I threw myself into the monster's chest and knocked it on its back. It felt good. I felt revived. I grabbed my knife and raised it over my head. The moon cast a glint upon the blade, and I brought it down with a furious shout. The blade pierced the monster's chest and into its heart. The beast groaned, and a sick, gurgling sound came from the monster's chest and its throat as its head lay back. Its limbs stopped flailing. I'd killed it. I'd killed the troll. I'd somehow turned my own certain death into a turnaround. I stood up, panting heavily and feeling my hands tremble, nearly dropping the knife and gun. The troll, meanwhile, lay lifelessly at my feet. "What happened to me?" I asked. In all my years as a monster hunter, I'd never once felt that before. It was like I'd achieved a new strength or something. Where had it come from? Was it because I was a night angel? Was it just a sudden adrenaline rush? I didn't know what to say or what to call it. All I knew was that whatever had happened, I had survived. I stood victorious over the dead monster. "Rebecca!" I turned around to see Yuri sprinting through the undergrowth to get me. He was sweating and he had a horrified look on his face. "What are you doing out here? I told you not to leave the hotel." Yuri then saw the troll at my feet and looked. "What have you done?" "I killed it," I said.
"Well, that's obvious. But where did it come from?"
"You tell me," I answered.
We stood in awkward silence for a few minutes, not knowing what to say or how to say it.
"You should have been more careful, Rebecca," Yuri finally said. "I came back to the room and saw that you were gone. I didn't know what to think. I thought you might have been killed."
"You can stop worrying about me, Yuri. I can take care of myself all right. I think." The truth was that for a split moment, I almost tasted death. Could I really take care of myself? Was that odd power going to always pop up in last-minute or life-threatening situations? Once again, I had no answers to the questions that plagued my thoughts and my mind. All I could do was wait to answer them.
Regardless, we need to get moving. Something brought that troll here, and we best leave before they come to check on it.
Yuri took my hand and dragged me from the creature.
I took your bags to the car, and we're leaving right now to find Joshua. He'll be able to shed some light on this, Yuri assured me.
I certainly hope so, I whispered. And with that, I followed Yuri obediently to the vehicles, prepared to drive off into the night and find this Joshua Rains, and finally get the answers I wanted. It was about time I learned what was happening to me. And I think we'll go ahead and end it there. 1 second. All right. Well, that was the first 10 chapters of Night Angel. What do you guys think? Take a moment to answer in the comments. Would love in the chat. Would love to hear your thoughts real quick while I edit the title real quick. Would love to hear your thoughts. Little quick paste. Yeah, like I said, this is one of my earlier stories. Like, I was still very, very new to writing when I started this. And I have not edited it in a very, very, very long time. Like I told you, it's about 12 years old. So, well, next time we do a reading stream, we will continue the Night Angel series. I do not remember how long it is. Let me actually see. Let me see how long it is. There are 40 chapters. So we are a fourth of the way done. There are 40 chapters. So we are a fourth of the way done. Awesome. Well, will there be any ogres, giants, yokai, or minotaurs? You'll find out. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much. Next time we do a reading stream, it will be to continue Rebecca Anderson. Like I said, this is how we're doing the reading streams from now on, where I pick one story and read it until we're done reading it, until I run out of stuff to read for it. Then we move on to the next story. That way, everyone who wants to read the story or catch up with my work can do so much more easily. I think this is a good idea. But yep, that is all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so, so much. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Don't know what we'll stream. Could be Dead by Daylight. Could be Space Marine 2. Could be For Honor. You never know. Could be something fun. But anyway, guys, thank you all so much. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.